Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Carlton Carnivores Lowland Greenhouse here. We're continuing with the Nepenthes species spotlight back in the Indochinese group. Today's species is one that is particularly special at the moment, not necessarily because it looks particularly unique from a lot of its relatives, but because it is an extremely recently described and also critically endangered species, and that is Nepenthes bracteosa. This plant is endemic to southern Thailand. It is only known from a small, maybe couple hundred square foot space on the slope of a single mountain. Luckily, that mountain is within a national park, so it's afforded some protection that way, but it is at risk of pretty much any sort of habitat disturbance. A landslide or an extreme drought and fire could potentially wipe out the entire species because it's only currently known from an extremely small space. I cannot remember the name of the mountain offhand. I'll try and put it up in the video for you, but literally it is only found in a couple hundred square foot region. Nepenthes bracteosa was actually originally identified as a unique species through a Facebook photo shared by a tourist from the area, and was collected for the first time in very early 2019. My plant actually originates from seeds that were distributed in very early 2019, and it was only officially described in 2022, so just around 2 years ago. This species is a very small species of Nepenthes in terms of height, at least. The vines only grow to about a foot tall, or not a foot, sorry, a meter tall, so about 3.5 feet tall, which is really small for most Nepenthes. Not terribly unusual necessarily for the pyrophytes, but even for those guys, a lot of those species will at least get to 5, 6, maybe 7 feet tall before they start dying back during the dry season. This one stays pretty shrunken all the time. The leaves are fairly elongate, kind of linear to lanceolate shape. They come to a very narrow point at the tip, and this species, relatively unusual in the Indochinese group, is fairly glabrous. Like the pitchers and the tendrils will have a mild covering of hair, but the leaves themselves are glabrous, much like Nepenthes bochorensis, which of course looks very different otherwise from this species because it has more oblong leaves. This one is more lanceolate, more linear, but compared to some of its relatives, like Nepenthes crabiensis, which is supposedly this one's closest relative, that glabrous texture is somewhat unique. The pitchers themselves, the lower pitchers here, in the wild, they can get up to about 8 inches tall, so roughly 20 centimeters. They are similar to a lot of the other Indochinese species, developing kind of, the lower half will be ovate to globose, so rounded, kind of expanded, and then it will form a distinctive hip just above that point, where the pitcher narrows a little bit, and then the upper portion of the pitcher is roughly cylindrical, maybe very slightly funnel-shaped up to the mouth. The mouth itself is fairly round, almost flattened except for the neck where it goes up in the back, kind of teardrop-shaped. In front of, they have relatively broad, mildly fringed wings, and then the peristome is a very simple, semi-thick but simple rounded shape. It doesn't have a lot of frills or crenellations like some other species might. Just a very simple overall plant to look at in that way. Coloration is quite variable in this species. My particular plant has a very nice kind of bicolor look where the pitchers are red and it keeps this very green peristome, but the plants in the wild may range from almost entirely greenish pitchers. They'll usually have at least a little bit of an orangish or red hue kind of flushed into them, to solid dark red throughout, including the peristome. Upper pitchers are quite different looking in this species. Like most Indochinese species, they are fairly thin and a lot lighter colored than the lowers. In this species, they'll grow up to about 25 centimeters, so roughly 10 inches tall, and they are tube-shaped through most of it. The very bottom portion is broadly funnel-shaped, comes up to a slight hip, and then above that it remains tube-shaped. Unique in this species, though, unlike its relatives, is that the upper pitchers retain those fringed wings on the front. In a lot of Nepenthes species, especially most of the Indochinese species, the upper pitchers, when they're fully matured, they lose those wings, and it's just two ribs that run down the front. This species, on the other hand, retains at least remnants of those wings, so there's little fringes that run down at least just below the peristome, if not most of the way down the pitcher. So that's one of the unique traits that you can use to identify this species compared to others. Mine, unfortunately, has not gotten big enough yet in order to produce pitchers, but I have just repotted it, given it a big upgrade. As small as this pot is, it is a big upgrade from what it's been in the for the past few years. So hopefully we will see it blossom out, grow up really quick, start producing its upper pitchers. Another unique trait of this species, and also what it's named for, bracteosa, is on the flower stalks. Unlike most of the other species in its related group, the flower stalks, each of the individual flowers on there has a bracteole associated with it. So a very tiny modified leaflet that kind of extends out just underneath the flower itself. Most other species, they don't have that. It's just the stalk, the little peduncle coming off of the main flower stalk up to the flower, and that's just bland, it's bare. This species has that little bracteole alongside each of its flowers, and that's not seen in its relatives. Now, like its other relatives in Indochina, this is a pyrophyte species, so they grow up to about a meter, 3.5 feet tall, and they can do that sometimes within a single growing season. Come the wet season, that's when they grow out, and then once it starts drying out, the dry season, the entire habitat can completely dry out, especially where these guys live. The elevation where they're at is 710 to 760 meters, so just a little over 2,000 to about 2,100, 2,200 feet in elevation. It's very warm, it's a very lowland environment, and during the dry season, the whole area will dry out for months at a time. These guys will survive that by, if they don't have enough moisture at least to keep the above ground growth stalled at that point, they will die back to a thick tuberous rootstock. Especially like if fire goes through and clears the habitat, these guys will die back to that. Now, like most Indochinese species, they're fairly easy to grow, especially if you can replicate kind of what they grow in the wild. They like to grow in fairly sandy habitats in the wild, or also they are known to grow on some limestone outcrops. I don't use a whole lot of sand or limestone in my cultivation, but you can use, generally a sphagnum mix works for most of these species, but with this species you could do something like a very, very sandy or perlite heavy peat mix, or in my case I do something like a 1-to-1, 2-to-1 perlite and sphagnum mix, so that it's a very light, very airy soil, and I maintain moisture so that the soil stays just moist and doesn't get wet, so that it replicates the more open, the more dry habitat that these guys grow in. They like warm temperatures, of course, between 75 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and barely any temperature change at night. During the wet season, they may take it a little bit cooler, because naturally it is when it's cooler in the wild. And then, of course, they can grow fairly quickly once they're established. Again, all that growth up to a meter tall can happen within one growing season if they're happy. So these guys aren't ones that will necessarily fit in a terrarium generally, because they will take up all that space pretty quickly once established. But it's also not one of those species that will get tremendously large like a lot of its relatives do. And then, like a lot of its relatives, of course, The Indochinese species tend to take well to cuttings. If you have multiple growth points, or if the plant reaches a point where it's flowered and you're ready to cut it back, get the basils going, you can just snap the vine, make a couple cuttings along the length of the vine, stick those into a moist moss or just clean water, and they will usually root within a couple of months. So this is, of course, a species that is still not common in cultivation. I don't know that I've really seen anyone with it for sale since I actually got mine, and these were actually distributed as tiny little seedlings. I got mine as an accidental freebie, actually, from someone who was propagating a whole bunch of Indochinese species for distribution. But you can imagine, because it looks a lot like most of its relatives, they're not too different. This is going to be a species that is mostly for people who are really into niche groups, if they really like growing the Indochinese species like I do. So the price probably won't be terribly high if you do manage to find them, but you can probably expect it to be a bit more expensive than, say, Bocorensis or Smilesii. So keep in mind that it will be a bit more of an expensive species if you like getting into the Indochinese group. But once they start propagating out and getting distributed, hopefully they'll become a little easier to acquire, and we'll see this species a little more common in cultivation, and hopefully maybe help boost the population in the wild, since it's so small at the moment, help protect it from getting lost permanently. So that is all that I have for that species right now. We will be continuing this series over the next couple of months with a couple of more species that I have to repot and check out. If you enjoy educational videos like this, or say the wildlife adventures that I do on this channel as well, do make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on that black bell. That gives you all notifications so you don't miss anything that's coming up. If you enjoy and you want to find more information, if you have questions about this species, if there's anything that I've forgotten that I need to add in, make sure to leave a comment on the video below. You can always find me on social media as well, posting extra videos and little tidbits and stuff on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Carlton Carnivores. On my website at carltoncarnivores.com, you can find the blog and database where I'm putting in information on all the different plants and animals that I work with, the species that I'm really interested in, and so on. And of course, at that website also, we have our shop, which has a lot of the plants, resin gem jewelry, and sometimes other stuff available for sale. In the manual section, there are, if you're looking for new pets, I sometimes have baby snakes available for sale. If you'd like to help in another financial manner, consider joining as a patron at patreon.com/hcarlton, donating that way. Members there do get early access to the videos, monthly seed contests where you get stuff that I don't generally have within the rest of my shop for sale, plants, seeds that I have in very limited quantity that I'm only giving out to 1 or 2 people, and you can win some of those there. That money helps support the editing time that it takes to get through these videos, me sitting down and writing out the blogs and the database stuff, funding the trips that I take to film wildlife. But if you can't do a monthly donation thing like with Patreon, you can always do one-time donations at Ko-fi or contact me directly. Information for that stuff will be in the video description below. And we also have our merch shop at Teespring right now, although I will probably be migrating a lot of that to my website itself soon. But until next time, whether it be another plant video or if you see me out in the wild somewhere filming wildlife, this is Hawk and Carlton at Carlton Carnivores.